folks. That's no good. Look at this. Okay. Hi. Hello. Shall we start? Thank you. Thank you for coming. Diehards. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the history of anesthesia. And the reason I chose this topic is I've always wondered how on earth people underwent surgery in the pre-anesthesia period. It must have been absolute hell. I would rather be dead. And every time I had to undergo an anesthetic, I said, oh, thank God we've advanced to this stage. Anyway, so the first hospitals in the United Kingdom, Europe, and the USA were modeled after the London Hospital in 1791. The theatre was on the top floor. The patient was locked behind a heavy door, so screams could not be heard. There was a huge skylight for light. The patient was gagged. The best surgeon was the fastest surgeon, understandably, and Napoleon's surgeon could perform an amputation in less than a minute. Okay. So I have here in front of me a little piece from the New York Herald of the 21st of July, 1841. And it's entitled, the paper is entitled A History of Modern Anesthesia. It's from the Department of Anaesthetics at the University of Cape Town. And in here, I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs of what a typical scene could be in an operating room in those days. The patient was a youth of about 15, pale, thin, but calm and firm. One professor felt for the femoral artery, had the leg held up for a few moments to ensure saving of blood. The compressed part of the tourniquet was placed upon the artery, and the leg was held by an assistant. The white swelling was fearful, frightful. A little wine was given the lad. He was pale, but resolute. His father supported his head and left hand. A second professor took the long, glittering knife, felt for the bone, thrust the knife carefully but rapidly. The boy screamed terribly. The tears went down his father's cheeks. The first cut from the blood flowed by the pint. The sight was sickening. The screams terrific. The operator calm. Again the knife was thrust upon the bone. The terrific screaming was renewed. 1 or 2 picked up their hats to leave. Scream upon scream, and again the bloody blade of the knife issued from the wound and was laid aside. The flesh quivered, and the boy cried agonizingly. The flesh was thrust back with a small piece of wet linen. The divided ends of the quivering muscles were stopped from blood with a sponge. The saw glistened in the hands of the operator. The father turned pale as death. The boy's eyes fastened on the instruments with glazed agony. Great, crushed once, twice, and the useless limb from the toes to the center of the thigh was quickly dropped into the tub under the table. That's what it looked. That's what it was like. Just too terrible to even and to contemplate. So this was a typical theatre scene in those days. Now, this is another scene, and in charge here is Theodor Bellroth, director of the Second Surgical Clinic in Vienna, Austria, and the founder of modern abdominal surgery. And Bellroth here, this painting was by Seligman in 1890. He was a German surgeon operating in the auditorium of the Vienna General Hospital. All the participants were wearing white coats. That was his rule. He started that rule. And the patient had been anesthetized, but there were no gloves, no masks, sterile instruments, and of course an audience. Now, I've been in the Department of Surgery for decades and decades, and I've always admired this painting in the common room of my department. It's called Surgery, and it's by Dorothy Kay, and done in 1939. This is the artist. She's drawn herself there. That's her daughter. The husband is performing the surgery, her husband. This is the anaesthetist, very caring sort of man, and then there was another surgeon there. And the article was written by Peter Gordon, sitting over there, and Anthony Reed, and it was called Medicine in Art, Surgery and Anesthesia in Art, the Contribution of Dorothy Kay. So it says here, Dorothy Kay, the acclaimed Irish-born Port Elizabeth artist, married Dr. Hobart Kay in Cape Town, South Africa in 1910. She was an exceptional portrait painter whose astute observation of detail and ability to empathize with the subject and convey character brought her much important work. And it goes on, and I can make this article available to you. I have to be at my best. My daughter is here. She's training to be an anaesthetist. But that's not why I chose this topic. So I came across this in the Atlantic. It's called the 50 Greatest Breakthroughs Since the Wheel, right? And this man was lamenting something. He said the choices are debatable. For example, in the BBC's top 10 Britons. But anesthesia came 46 out of 50. And that was only because one panelist pushed it hard. And he said, if I were doing the ranking, it would be the top 10. Certainly above the personal computer. In this case, the test for me is, which would I miss more if it didn't exist? Now, the thing is, this has always interested me. I was in the UK at a time when they were doing the 10 Greatest Britons, and they were having this competition on BBC. And Lady Diana was beating Charles Darwin and William Shakespeare. You know, I mean, and that's the culture of the day. Okay, so in this story of the history of anesthesia, there are four, there might have been more, but there are four main players, okay? And the question that's being asked is, who was the first anaesthetist? So there were two physicians. One was Crawford Long of Georgia, and that's him at the bottom here. Can you see him there? And does this work? Does this arrow work? Okay. And then there was another physician, Charles T. Jackson of Boston. Okay. And then there were two dentists. One was Horace Wells of Connecticut and William T.G. Morton, also of Boston. Now, these are Americans most frequently cited by the physicians and historians who pursue the Wood Library Museum fellowships. And this I got from anesthesiology, from a journal. Now, I've used medicine's 10 greatest discoveries, Crawford Long and surgical anesthesia, like I said to you in the first lecture. And then recently I got hold of another book, but very recent. It's called Waking Up Safer, and it's by Baron Metz. Baron Metz trained in South Africa as an anaesthetist. In fact, if you came to my lectures on what it means to be human, his father sat here. And Metz sort of did a PhD at UCT in pharmacology and worked at Columbia University. Now, even after the advent of anesthesia, there were always some unfortunate incidents, one or other unfortunate incidents. This is Hannah Greener of Winlaton near Newcastle upon Tyne. She died more than 150 years ago on January the 28th, 1848, after receiving a chloroform anesthetic for the removal of a toenail. She was a healthy 15-year-old girl who had successfully undergone an anesthetic with diethyl ether several months before the removal of another toenail. Hers was the first death attributed to the new and wondrous blessing of anesthesia for surgical pain relief. Various authors have ascribed her death to an anesthetic overdose, aspiration of the water and brandy used in attempts to resuscitate her, or some combination of secondary complications that will never be determined. That was unfortunate. Okay, but let's go back in history for a while. So this woman, Euphane McCain, okay, in 1591, she was thrown into a pit and buried alive and pleading for mercy. What was her fault? She gave birth to twins and during the difficult labor asked for pain relief. The church saw it as a justifiable pain inflicted by God. So you don't ask for pain relief. Seeking pain relief was going against God's word. The concept of pain as a visitation from God dates back to early Christianity. The Egyptian papyri mention painful surgical procedures and certain herbs available to relieve the pain. Okay? So the pre-anesthesia era, there was the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, mentioned surgery without relief of pain. And in India, in 600 BC, the era of the Sushrata, and a single surgeon in China used aconitum to couple pain relief with surgical procedures. In 64 BC, Discoid Dioscorides, a Greek army surgeon, was the first to use the term anesthesia. 150-200 AD, a few Greek and Roman surgeons used herbs for pain relief and to put the patient to sleep. And that was the precursor to modern anesthetics. The Muslim physicians soaked sponges into herbal mixtures and made patients inhale them. That wasn't very effective. Okay, so if you want to read about that, that's the title of the book. Now, let's start with the ether era. So ether, this is its structure. I'm not giving any chemistry tonight, but just some structure. This is ether. It's a very simple molecule. It's an alcohol, right, where the hydrogen of the OH group is replaced by another group, usually an alkyl chain. These are called alkyl chains, these CH3 molecules. So in 1275, as early as that, the Spanish alchemist Raymundus Lullius mixed and then distilled sulfuric acid and alcohol to give a sweet white fluid, ether. Its use was only discovered 6 centuries later. In 1605, the Swiss alchemist Paracelsus used ether to relieve extreme pain. Again, we wait until the mid-19th century for ether to be used without pain relief. Okay? So, both dentists and doctors used it. You had light and deep anesthesia with ether. You had ether frolics and laughing gas parties. In January 1842, a dentist by the name of Elijah Pope performed a painless extraction of the tooth of a patient, Miss Harvey, using ether. Okay. But the man, the first man who was really given huge prominence in history was Crawford Long, who lived from 1815 to 1878, and he was the first person to use surgical and obstetrical anesthesia. And the chapter in the book is called Crawford Long and Anesthesia. So he was the first to use it for surgical purposes. He had a medical practice in Jefferson, Georgia, and he was a dedicated doctor. He was late for his own wedding because he was attending to a patient. Now that's a sign of true greatness. He organized ether parties and noticed that after thrashing about and bruising, he felt no pain. On the 30th of March 1842, he got a patient, James Venable, to inhale ether fumes from a soaked towel and successfully removed a cyst from his neck and a second one 9 weeks later. The patient felt no pain. It's remarkable. What a difference. In 1842, he did a toe amputation. In 1846, he tried it on 8 patients. And in the 1840s also, with William Clark, they independently used ether on patients, but did not publish their work. They only published in 1849. And that caused a lot of problems when people were deciding who was the greatest and the first anesthetist. Okay. Now, in his honor, the U.S. Postal Service used a photograph of Long as an inspiration for engraving its postage stamp honoring the Georgian in 1942, and that was Crawford Long, and that was the stamp. Okay. South Africa at that time had an anesthetist by the name of Atherstone in 1814 to 1898. the first use of anesthesia for surgery in South Africa. He arrived in South Africa with his parents as 1820 settlers. His father, John Atherton, was appointed the district surgeon of Uitenhage in 1822. He served as an assistant surgeon in the 6th Frontier War in 1834, and on 16th of June 1847, he was the first surgeon outside Europe and America to perform a successful amputation on the Albany deputy sheriff, Mr. Carlyle, using ether as an anesthetic. On recovering from the anesthetic, the patient said, "What? My leg is off. Impossible. I can't believe it. It's the greatest discovery ever made." Okay, and Atherton, this is the Atherton inhaler. This is a picture given to me by Peter. The other main player in the story is Charles Jackson, 1805. He was also a physician. He was from Harvard. He had his MD with honors, and he worked at the Massachusetts General Hospital. He had an encyclopedic knowledge. He had written 400 papers. He was a polymath, a chemist, a physician, mineralogist, and world-class geologist. He was also over-competitive, deceitful, sly, manipulative, and highly suspicious. He was brilliant with sociopathic tendencies. Professor Charles Jackson was the inventor of the telegraph and anesthesia, in his own eyes at least. False claims, but he was never disciplined. Now, just a few of his shenanigans. There was a man by the name of William Beaumont who was an expert on digestion, and he studied digestive processes in a patient by directly observing it through an open gastric wound. He sent a sample of the gastric juice to Jackson to analyze chemically. Jackson went on and circulated a petition in Congress in 1834 asking that the patient be put in his care. The Surgeon General denied the application and was furious with Jackson for stealing someone else's idea. Samuel Morse was on a ship with Jackson in 1832. Jackson was explaining the flow of electricity and the length of a wire. Morse commented that it would be possible. This is Morse of the Morse code, remember? Morse commented that it would be possible to transmit messages in this way. He invented the telegraph and patented it in 1837. Jackson took him to the Supreme Court, claiming it was he who invented the telegraph. Jackson obviously lost the case. Okay, so this is the first operation, another piece of art, under ether. It's a painting by Robert C. Hinckley, and it's from the Boston Medical Library. Okay, then the third player was Morton. William Morton made history by being the first in the world to publicly and successfully demonstrate the use of ether anesthesia for surgery. This occurred at what came to be called the Ether Dome at Massachusetts General Hospital on the patient Edward Gilbert Abbott. The surgeon was John Collins Warren, and he noted, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug, this is the real stuff." Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Sr., suggests the terms anesthetic and anesthesia in a letter to William T.G. Morton. Okay? Now, Morton and Jackson. Morton needed help, and who better to team up with than Jackson, who had genuine knowledge. But Jackson and Morton, what they did is they added aromatic oils to ether and patented it as a superior form of anesthetic called lithion. They were emboldened when it worked on a patient, even Frost, whose tooth they extracted painlessly, getting a coverage in the Boston Journal on the very next day. But Morton approaches Warren again and asks whether they could administer lithion to a patient who required surgery for a tumor of the jaw. Warren agrees, and his house surgeon, Haywood, informs Morton that it's on for the morning of Friday, October the 16th, 1846. Henry James Bigelow arranged a demonstration for the leading surgeons in Boston. Morton does not arrive, but Bigelow finds him and persuades him to go through with the demonstration of ether anesthesia. And on that day, Friday, 16th October 1846, history was made. It was a great success at the Massachusetts General Hospital. There were a few hiccups because Morton used an inhaler instead of a towel. The patient suffered no pain but became incoherent, agitated, and felt that his neck was being scratched. The next patient was even better because Morton used an inhaler with better valves. Now, there was an invitation from the National Dental Association to readers, and they were asked which was the best or influential article in the New England Journal of Medicine in the past 200 years. The New England Journal of Medicine is an extremely significant journal in medicine. So, the New England Journal of Medicine celebrated its 200-year anniversary in 2012. As part of its celebration, readers were invited by the Journal of the American Dental Association to nominate and vote for the most important article published in the 200-year history of the NEJM. Okay? So, the article that detailed the dentist's demonstration of anesthesia was voted the most important in New England Journal of Medicine's 200 years. Can you believe it? A paper that was read before the American Academy of Arts and Sciences on November the 3rd. So that operation, that demonstration at Mass Gen was done in October 1846. On November the 3rd, a Boston surgeon, Henry Jacob Bigelow, was voted as the most important article published in the New England Journal of Medicine's history. It was by Bigelow, it was called Insensibility During Surgical Operations Produced by Inhalation. The Boston dentist, William Morton, I had just introduced you to him, demonstrated the use of ether by inhalation to achieve general anesthesia during a surgical procedure, which was a tooth extraction, on, as you know, October the 16th, 1846, at Mass Gen. The surgeon was Dr. Warren, who was a surgeon at the hospital. Although the author of this article stated that the patient said he felt some pain during the procedure, a review of subsequent surgical operations involving tooth extraction, removal of tumors, and limb amputations led Bigelow to conclude that the use of ether allowed the procedures to be performed painlessly. We've made a turn in history, and that's the paper. That's a paper that was published in the Journal of the American Dental Association. So who discovered, this is the actual paper, the Bigelow paper. So who discovered anesthetics? Henry James Bigelow's article drew attention from around the world. Jackson, Morton, and Wells each claimed to have discovered anesthetics. Clark and Long remained silent. Morton and Jackson signed a legal agreement that they are the co-discoverers of surgical anesthesia. The exclusion of Wells may have contributed to his suicide in 1848. Jackson, ever the deceitful schemer, the one who tried to appropriate others' ideas, claims to the French Academy of Sciences that he was the sole discoverer of anesthetics. Morton tears up the agreement and makes a similar claim. Okay, so this is just the paper here of Bigelow's that was chosen to be the best paper in the New England Journal of Medicine in 200 years. Okay, then there was a furor. Remember lithium? Warren, Haywood, and Bigelow heard that Morton and Jackson had patented lithium. They thought that was unethical. Jackson withdraws from patent, but asks Morton to pay him a percentage of all further use of lithium. A furious Warren bans Morton and his product from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The truth then came out that lithium was merely ether with oils. The oils did not make a better product. The patent was cancelled. So all these guys were quite characters. Entered the US Congress in 1847, the ether controversy needed to be resolved. It preoccupied Congress for 16 years, despite the onset of the American Civil War. Okay? So why did the New England Journal of Medicine consider this article to be the most significant in its 200-year history? Although the physician Crawford Long, this is Crawford Long, the man who got his face on a postage stamp, using ether, and dentist Horace Wells, this man here, using nitrous oxide, often are credited with discovering anesthesia, it was dentist William Morton who successfully demonstrated its use to the medical establishment in the fall of 1846. Today, it is inconceivable that surgical operations such as limb amputations would be performed without anesthesia. Thank God for that. The importance of the discovery of general anesthesia by dentists Horace Wells and William Morton was one of the most significant developments in modern medicine. This is confirmed by New England Journal readers having voted this 1846 article the most important published by that journal in its 200-year history. Okay, but who should the honor of discoverer of anesthesia go to? Should it go to William Morton? He had the support of Daniel Webster, orator, lawyer, founder of the Whig Party, and a United States Senator. Oliver Wendell Holmes, professor of anatomy at Harvard, supported him. Congress says no. He learnt about ether from Jackson and said so himself. Called the great pretender in congressional reports because he initially pretended to Jackson that he knew nothing about ether. He practiced anaesthetics, had financial losses, and died in 1868 at the age of 49. He worked at the most famous of universities and for one of the best surgeons in the world at that time. His demonstration was witnessed by other surgeons in Boston. Bigelow's article made him world famous, and by mid-1847, his technique was used by doctors all over the world, including South Africa. His nomination as the discoverer of anaesthetics was supported by no less than Sir William Osler. Credit must go not to the one who has the first idea or shows proof. Do you hear that? Credit must go not to the one who has the first idea or shows proof that it works, but to the one who convinces the world of its value. Did he know that Morton visited Jefferson in 1842? So when Morton visited Jefferson, Jefferson had already used anesthesia, but he didn't publish it, but he might have told Morton about it. So that complicates matters. And this is the Morton inhaler. Now, this is at the UCT Anesthesia Museum, and it was donated to them by Dr. George Baus. Okay? Then there was Horace Wells, the other dentist. He had nothing to do with surgical anesthesia because he attempted only dental anesthesia. He had committed suicide anyway. So he was off the list. So was it Wells? The American Dental Association in 1864 and in 1870, and the American Medical Association in 1870 and 1872 said it could be Wells. But Wells was a dentist who had never practiced surgical anesthesia. But he had practiced dental anesthesia before Morton's demonstration. So it was left to two people, Jackson versus Long. They were the finalists now. So Congress asked them to sort it out between themselves. Jackson visited Long in Georgia and there was no resolution. Jackson later became demented for the rest of his life, thus leaving Long as the only claimant after 1846. Was it Long? The electors of the New York University Hall of Fame in 1913, they said Long lived in a very small town, Jefferson, of 400 people with no medical societies. He only published in 1849 because he didn't realize the significance of his own work. In 1921, the American College of Surgeons, meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, named Long the discoverer and created the Crawford Long Association. They erected a statue of Long in Statuary Hall, Washington, D.C. Long Memorial Hospital was named after him in Atlanta. And so Crawford Long went down in history, and this was his statue. My profession, he said, is to me a ministry from God. So, let's move on. So that was the ether era. Let's talk about nitrous oxide. Ether was a relatively safe anesthetic, but its flammable properties and propensity to cause post-operative nausea and vomiting led to the search of a safer agent with fewer side effects. Nitrous oxide was the next anesthetic of choice, and this is what it looks like. Again, a very simple molecule. It is commonly known as laughing gas or nitrous. It's a chemical compound, an oxide of nitrogen with the formula N2O. At room temperature, it is colorless, non-flammable gas with a metallic taste. Joseph Priestley discovered it in 1772. Thomas Beddoes started the pneumatic medicine fad in England, medication by inhalation of various gases. Humphrey Davy inhaled nitric oxide and couldn't stop laughing, so he called it laughing gas. Day wrote a book in 1800 on laughing gas. Davy, laughing gas should be used in operations. Davy was quite a chap. He was a poet who edited The Ancient Mariner for Samuel Coleridge. Okay? So this is Horace Wells again, and I just went back to him because I just wanted to say about him that he graduated from Harvard. He was gifted, unstable. He sold works of art. He was a manufacturer of portable baths and stoves. Even wanted to enter the ministry. On December the 10th, 1844, he attended a nitrous oxide party where an injured guest who had inhaled the stuff felt no pain after severely bruising his leg. Wells asked his host, Gardner Colton, to give him nitrous oxide while someone removed his decaying tooth, and he felt no pain. This is the greatest discovery in the history of the world, said Wells. Unfortunately, his public demonstration of its use as an anesthetic at Mass Gen Hospital was a dismal failure, and he was booed. Now we come to the chloroform era. Again, CHCl3, another very simple compound. Ether had to be replaced, vomiting and bronchial irritation. Chloroform is a colorless, sweet-smelling organic compound, right? Chloroform can daze or knock out people even when it's consumed in small doses. In 1831, the American chemist Samuel Guthrie, the first to make chloroform, he tested, his 8-year-old daughter tasted some of it and fell asleep for hours. Unfortunately, it caused liver damage. Now, the first person to use it was Sir James Simpson, the University of Edinburgh. He used anaesthetics in obstetrics. Now, you remember that was the city in which poor Euphane McCain was killed because she asked for pain relief. This man, James Simpson, was Queen Victoria's anaesthetist. He used Genesis. He told the Scots, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh thereof. So God gave Adam anesthesia. John Snow of Britain became the first full-time anaesthetist in the world to control ether-air mixtures with better ether inhalers and studied the physiological effects of anesthetics. During the era of chloroform, he anesthetized himself with no side effects, delivered his niece's child under it, and asked John Snow to administer it to Queen Victoria's 8th child, Prince Leopold, on 7th April 1853. It was very successful, and it quietened the Calvinists in Scotland for good. Okay, and then you move into the era of endotracheal anesthesia, where you put a tube down a person's windpipe. This was a Scottish surgeon, Sir Million McEwen. He used a rigid metal tube, which could have been problematic. He passed it down the trachea. Now the lungs could be inflated or deflated and wouldn't just collapse through atmospheric pressure when the chest was opened. The German surgeon Friedrich Trendelenburg designed a metal tube with inflatable cuff but could only use it by making a hole in the trachea. But better and more flexible tubes by Franz Kuhn of Germany, which went through the nose, and Dorrance and Janeway used flexible silastic tube with inflatable cuff, and that was an improvement. Okay? And then Sir Ivan McGill in Britain, he was an Irish-born anaesthetist who's famous for his involvement in much of the innovation and development in modern anesthesia. He helped to establish the Association of Anaesthetists of Great Britain and Ireland. Several medical devices are named after him. He did a tube insertion because you needed light anesthesia first. McGill used cocaine to anesthetize patients' throats, and sent a tube through the nose and another through the mouth into the windpipe of the fully conscious patient. So this was a new development. Light anesthesia first and then the real anesthetic. He kept the cocaine use a secret. Okay? And then the endotracheal anesthesia in the USA, Erdher Goodell and his dog Away and his dunking dog show. He anesthetized and intubated Away, his dog. He immersed him in an aquarium. He discontinued the anesthetic. He pulled Away out of the water, removed the tube, and allowed the dog to wake up. The Away did not drown because the endotracheal tube had an inflatable cuff which would seal Away's windpipe and allow him to breathe as through a snorkel. Endotracheal anesthesia became common practice in the USA. And then later, there's been developments of better compounds like trilene in the 1930s, ethylene in 1923, divinyl ether in 1931, cyclopropane in the 1930s and 40s, potent at low concentrations and suppressed breathing. Patients' breathing could now be regulated by an airbag. It was a great advance in anesthesiology. Halothane in 1956, safe, pleasant to breathe, potent and non-flammable. And curare, the poison used by South American Indians in 1942 to relax the muscles, making surgeons' work easier. And then local anesthesia, cupping by Indians in Peru, and incision in the head to remove evil spirits. I think early in the Islamic period this was also done. The doctor would chew coca leaves and drip saliva onto the patient's wound to anesthetize it. Okay? And then William Halsted at Johns Hopkins, America's most famous surgeon. He was an American who emphasized strict aseptic technique during surgical procedures. He introduced rubber gloves. He was an early champion of newly discovered anesthetics and introduced several new operations, including the radical mastectomy for breast cancer. He used cocaine for local anesthesia by direct injection into nerves, supplying area to be operated on. He himself was addicted to cocaine, and that was revealed by Sir William Osler at the end of his life. Freud used cocaine too. So then we go into the period of epidural and spinal anesthesia, an attempt to numb the big nerves emerging from the cord. In 1888, Leonard Corning injected cocaine into the epidural space. So here in the back. In 1889, August Bayer of Germany injected cocaine into the spinal fluid. Hildebrand used it in the Anglo-Boer War. Cocaine was replaced by Novocaine, synthesized in 1899 by Alfred Einhorn and used by Braun in 1905 in Germany. So then there's the intravenous anesthesia, barbiturates in the 1930s, ultimately led to thiopentone becoming the gold standard for 50 years. This became the triad of modern anesthesia. Anesthesia, inhalation of intravenous propofol is the current gold standard. Analgesia, opiates like morphine and non-specific anti-inflammatory are also used, and muscle relaxation to assist the surgeon, curare since 1945. Everybody knows that Michael Jackson died because he was addicted to propofol. I want to thank Peter sitting over there, Associate Professor Peter Gordon. He's the curator of the Nagin Parbu Museum of Anesthetics at Hrudsky Hospital. He gave me a wonderful tour He spent a lot of time with me. He gave me a wonderful tour of the museum and an excellent suggestion for my talk today. Thank you, Peter. And I suggest that people visit that museum. And then I want to thank my daughter who's here today. And she's training to be an anaesthetist. And that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. So you can go home now to supper. I knew you were rushing, so I rushed a bit. Sure, thank you.